updates coming in at the moment. There's a fresh statement coming in, I understand, from President Trump, and this is on Hormuz. It's a big warning by U.S. President. He says that all U.S. ships, aircraft and military personnel with additional ammunition, weaponry and anything else that's appropriate and necessary for the lethal prosecution and destruction of an already substantially degraded enemy will remain in place and in and around Iran until such time as the real agreement is reached, fully complied with. Pratibha, I believe you have the entire statement from Truth Social, that social media post, with you.
Yes, so Madhav, this comes after the ceasefire announcement, and look at what the US president now says. All US ships, aircraft and military personnel with additional ammunition, weaponry and anything else that is appropriate and necessary for the lethal prosecution and destruction of an already substantially degraded enemy will remain in place in and around Iran until such time as the real agreement is fully complied with. So clearly the tone is getting completely different. If for any reason it is not, which is highly unlikely, then the shooting starts bigger and better and stronger than anyone has ever seen before. It was agreed a long time ago, and despite all of the fake rhetoric to the contrary, no nuclear weapons, and the Strait of Hormuz will be open and safe. In the meantime, our great military is loading up and resting, looking forward actually to its next conquest. America is back. That's what he goes on to say. Is this an indication that ceasefire talks are going on? Yes, but at the same time, the US, Madhav, is also making it clear.
It's a very clear threat, because he says that if for any reason it is not, which is highly unlikely, then the shooting starts bigger, better and stronger than anyone has seen before. It was agreed a long time ago, and he says that the great military is loading up and resting, looking forward actually to its next conquest. Srinjoy is with us. Srinjoy, this is a very clear threat coming in from President Trump that if Iran doesn't fall in line, then they're going to look at a much larger scale military operation.
A very tiny carrot and a large stick. That's what you can call this statement, because at this point, 13 days left for the ceasefire to end. You wonder why such a statement is necessary. But with President Trump, you can never tell, and he's making it very clear that one, Iran should have no nuclear weapons. Iran has never said it will have nuclear weapons, though it has enriched its uranium to roughly 60%. The other, of course, is the point that currently every piece of military equipment, whether it's an aircraft carrier, whether it's the Marines, whether it's the 82nd Airborne, everything is close by, is what President Trump says. And if necessary, then they will be back and they will be used. That's a clear message that's coming from President Trump. At this point, he is saying that this whole operation is on pause for the next 13 days. And he hopes that these two things are sorted out by the Iranians.
All right. I believe Amita is also with us from our special war studio. Amita, it's very, very clear that that ceasefire which was announced yesterday was a very tentative one. Already within less than 24 hours since that announcement coming in, we're looking at cracks, we're looking at a clear misunderstanding, and what's more is that Vice President Vance's statement today raises questions about what kind of negotiation Pakistan has done if there is such an important difference between the two sides as to what is happening in Lebanon. Amita.
Well, absolutely, because Madhav, Pakistan has been boasting and patting itself on the back, suggesting that, it is the one that is playing the role of the so-called peacemaker. But as far as when it comes to the warring sides are concerned, let them be brought on the same page rather than, getting them to Islamabad on the 11th of April as far as what these so-called Islamabad talks are all about. Now, what we are going to talk about, mainly when it comes to 24 hours, as Madhav was pointing out, within the ceasefire there, because it is fragile, it is sensitive, and already Iran seems to be talking and blaming Israel for the violation there. Now, is Lebanon a part of this truce or not? Iran says it is. Meanwhile, Israel and the United States deny. However, this seems to be a straight-up warning that has now come in from President Trump, and this is something that what he has been doing consistently, issuing warnings there. As Srinjoy also continues to be with us, because we need, as far as this defining character is now concerned, to this truce, because Srinjoy, as far far as to all three sides, this truce means different things. The versions are coming in differently. And of course, when it comes to Iran, it is maximizing the benefit because it knows its strength, and that is the Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz has proved to be the best weapon that the Iranians could have imagined. And it has actually slowed down the world's economy. And if they close the Strait of Hormuz again, nobody has ever said that the Strait of Hormuz, which has been opened, in a sense, cannot be closed again. And if it is closed again, then again the world's economy will suffer. Now, this is a weapon that the Iranians have, and you can use it whenever they wish. That's the first thing. And this is a weapon that has virtually been given to them by President Trump. So at this point, all three sides have 13 days, and 13 days to arrive at a situation when there can be a ceasefire for a longer period, because these 13 days are very crucial. So if the talks actually go well, it will benefit not just these three countries, but all the countries in the region. And many of them have suffered enormously, and much of the world. So these 13 days are going to be crucial. But if there are threats like this, then one wonders how things will go. Because President Trump insists on two things. One, Iran should have no nuclear weapons, and the Strait of Hormuz should be opened. Well, before the war began, 41 days ago, the Strait of Hormuz was open.
Well, that seems to be the very case that what we are looking at, because as far as President Trump's previous warning was that just hours before that deadline was expected to expire, he said that he's ready to wipe out the entire civilization. However, now things have drastically changed as far as this two-week ceasefire that has now been announced. But what has happened within hours of this ceasefire announcement? Because now the world is questioning its very credibility, as tensions are now far from over. Israel has already drawn the red line over Lebanon, with Prime Minister Netanyahu warning that Iran has still, when it comes to on agreeing with its terms and conditions, well, Israel says we are ready with the finger on the trigger, because this is something that what we have been waiting for. Israeli military carrying out one of the largest and the biggest waves of airstrikes, and deep into when it comes to the commercial and the residential zones in Lebanon, as far as Hezbollah command centers is concerned. And within minutes, we are looking at several big strikes that has happened on part of the Israeli Defense Forces.
Well, first of all, I know there's been some conversations between the Israelis and the leadership of our country today. I haven't been involved in that because I've been busy doing stuff in Hungary. I'm actually supposed to get an update when I get on the plane. But let me say a couple things. First of all, I actually think, and there's a lot of bad faith negotiation and a lot of bad faith, propaganda going on. I think this comes from a legitimate misunderstanding. I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran, and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states. Now, that said, the Israelis, as I understand it, again, I'm supposed to get a fuller report when I get on the plane, have actually offered to be, frankly, to check themselves a little bit in Lebanon because they want to make sure that our negotiation is successful. That's not because that is part of the ceasefire. I think that's the Israelis trying to set us up for success, and we'll, of course, see how that unfolds in the next few days. But look, if Iran wants to let this negotiation fall apart in a conflict where they were getting hammered over Lebanon, which has nothing to do with them and which the United States never once said was part of the ceasefire, that's ultimately their choice. We think that would be dumb, but that's their choice.
Mr. Vice President, Iran is continuing to...
Can I ask you about Lebanon?
Go ahead, yeah.
Because there seems to be a disagreement about whether Lebanon was included in this proposal. And the Speaker of the Parliament, who you're going to sit across from the table from in Islamabad, has just said that he thinks negotiations would be unreasonable while that war is ongoing. So would you ask Israel to hold hold off strikes to allow some space for these talks?
Well, first of all, I know there's been some conversations between the Israelis and the leadership of our country today. I haven't been involved in that because I've been busy doing stuff in Hungary. I'm actually supposed to get an update when I get on the plane. But let me say a couple things. First of all, I actually think, and there's a lot of...
Well, that seems to be the tale of multiple versions there. Iran saying something else, US, however, denying that we have accepted the 10-point proposal. Let's, in the meantime, talk about if the ceasefire will already hold, when it comes to the 2-week deadline, or will it collapse already within hours, what we are looking at. Now, has the US-Iran truce already having shattered? Let's get you as far as when it comes to this point-by-point explanation is concerned. Because on Israel's side, now they have been continuing with their strikes across Lebanon, saying that Lebanon was never part of this truce that has now been, taken upon, and also saying that for the US, we are looking at a separate conflict altogether. They have been saying that stop backing Hezbollah and reduce when it comes to Iran's influence, especially when it comes to shielding its proxies is concerned. Iran, however, has completely different story to say as far as enrichment now is concerned, because they have been talking about the same conflict ecosystem. Halt all of the Israeli strikes, not just on Iranian territory, but also when it comes to its proxies are concerned. And legitimate resistance, as Iranians call it, is by Hezbollah. Nuclear enrichment is something that they have also been talking about as far as its safeguarding is concerned. So that seems to be the choke points there. As far as the 10-point peace proposal is concerned, the White House press secretary already saying that it was something that was thrown into the garbage, not even worth considering as well for them. But however, this seems to be the situation what we are now looking at, because immediately what we are looking at, Iran prompted to shut the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, it is now dealing it in a way that it is now trying to maximize the benefits monetarily to, in fact, get more out of with the passage of each and every ship. However, President Trump's latest warning seems to suggest that the Strait of Hormuz should remain open and safe for everyone. However, for Iran, in the last 40 days, it has been using it to its maximum benefit of exuding dominance over there, and multiple tankers there have been stopped, especially when it comes to crossing the Persian Gulf. Well, that seems to be the big focus we are tracking continuously right here on Times Now. And of course, when it comes to their election-related updates, we'll be heading into a very short break. Stay tuned.